Hi, my name is Dr. Jackalyn Rainosek. I'm with DTP-Leadership Group, and this is Hot Topic Bold Talk. The title of my podcast today is Stuffings, Soot, and Sedition, a Thanksgiving of Resistance in Trump's America. I began to think about what did I need to do for today, because there are many things going on in our country that we do not have to be thankful for. So I want to begin with honesty, since anything less is surrendering to the gaslighting that happens every day with Trump. I do want you to know what I'm thankful for today. I'm thankful, deeply thankful for my spouse, my son, and many friends who keep me grounded and loved, and I love them. That gratitude is real. It is the best thing in my life. Waking up in Trump's world is awful. There's nothing that's exciting about it. Thanksgiving is supposed to be the holiday where we gather and remember things like family and community and a roof over our heads and enough food to share with other people and the calm to feel safe. Yet this year, as I sit with my gratitude, I also feel an ache in my heart that I cannot ignore. Not because I'm unthankful, but also what's happening in our country is so stark that it makes the holiday feel different. Representative Haley Stevens from Michigan says it plainly in her Thanksgiving message to Michigan's people. She has a lot to say that she's grateful for, but the spirit is harder to feel this year because people everywhere are scared and angry, and for very good reasons. She's traveled to Michigan and she's heard many people say that. So, my episode today is about why Thanksgiving feels heavier in Trump's America. It's about real, manageable harms to people's lives, hunger, public health risk, and pollution. And it's about something even more chilling, a president who now labels constitutional duty as sedition and hints that death is an appropriate punishment for dissent. These are not separate stories. As you will see, they are the same story told through different wounds that are happening in America. So I want to start with Haley Stevens' Thanksgiving letter. It reads like a voice from the ground. It's not abstract rhetoric. It is an emotional and economic reality people are living through. She says she's grateful for her family and for Michigan and for the grassroots team that keeps her fighting. But she refuses to perform a fake holiday cheer while watching people struggle. She points to what she's not grateful for. Millions of Americans losing emergency food assistance early this month, and food banks seeing record lines heading into the holidays. A Republican-led government shut down that halted vital agencies, leaving people stranded in bureaucratic chaos while trying to travel home. Healthcare costs skyrocketing and critical tax credits at risk, even while insurance giants rake in record profits. Working families unable to afford rent, groceries, or necessities, while Trump pours attention and money into self-glorifying vanity projects like the gold-plated White House ballroom. A mega leadership that pals around with the billionaires while working class fall behind, that they have forgotten and care less about. And then she pivots to what matters most, the chance to fight back, to build something better, to protect working families, to represent a state that raised her with grit and solidarity, to refuse to normalize any of this. That pivot she does is the moral heartbeat of this episode. Because gratitude isn't the same thing as obedience. Being thankful for your friends doesn't mean you're required to pretend the country is healthy. In fact, if you truly love your people, you have to tell the truth about what hurts them. We're not failing Thanksgiving spirit. Trump's world is failing people during Thanksgiving. So let's start with the most basic human need, food. The loss of emergency food assistance is not a small budget adjustment. It is a moral disaster that lands heavily on children, seniors, and low-wage workers. Stevens is right to name it. Holiday food banks are more lines than they've ever been. They're policy outcomes. They are what happens when leaders decide that the poorest Americans can be squeezed without consequences. And here's what makes this year different. The cruelty is paired with a narrative that tells struggling people to shut up and be grateful anyway. Thanksgiving becomes a kind of national contradiction. We celebrate abundance while millions now face scarcity. We preach family values while families are pushed to desperation. We say count your blessings while policy actively removes them. This is a political choice, and it's the first hinge point in my through line for today's podcast, which is material hardship is not accidental in Trump's America, it's engineered. Stevens also points to the government shutdown. Shutdowns in recent years have become a form of political hostage taking. A party that can or won't govern shuts down the country to prove a point, and ordinary people pay the price. Even after agencies reopen, there's a backlog that ripples for weeks. Air travel chaos, delayed services, interrupted pay for government workers. Families trying to get home to the loved ones are treated like collateral damage in a partisan standoff. Trump's world thrives on disruption. It keeps people tired, anxious, and off balance. If you're scrambling to cover rent or rebook flights, you're not the one that's disorganized. You're not the one that's not looking at alternatives. You're the one that's in survival mode because of all the other things that are happening. And that's not an accident. It is a strategy. Now let's move on from the household harm to institutional harm. Because one of the most dangerous things happening right now is the weakening of the system that keep people safe. The Washington Post reports and so does Reuters echo the same thing, that Richard Pazdur, the new head of the FDA drug evaluation, is raising internal alarms about the Trump administration's drive to expedite drug approvals. He says he's concerned and he's very serious about it. He has warned that the initiatives to speed decisions could be unsafe, insufficiently transparent, and in some cases, potentially illegal. According to his report, the administration is pushing to reduce the number of studies required for drug approvals or label changes. Career scientists risk being sidelined from controversial policy decisions, meaning political appointees gain power over evidence-based reviews that they have no background to review those medical studies. Pazur worries that this is not just streamlining, but a fundamental shift in standards for safety and efficiency. Let's speak here what this means. There's a difference between eliminating red tape and eliminating safeguards. In medicine, those safeguards are not bureaucratic formalities. They are the difference between people living and people dying, between treatments that work and treatments that harm. Faster approvals can sound good on a bumper sticker, but medicine isn't a campaign ad. If you weaken the requirements for real-world testing, you don't create innovation. You create risk. And the risk is not carried by the wealthy or the well-connected. It lands on the patients who have no choice but to trust the system. Speed without standards doesn't lower cost. It just shifts costs into side effects, trials and errors, suffering, disability, bankruptcy, and funerals. This is the second hedge point in my thoughts today. So here's my next through line. Trump's world uses the language of efficiency to justify stripping every human protection. Now let's talk about air itself. On November 25th, 2025, the Washington Post reported that Trump's EPA is moving to abandon the Biden-era rule tightening limits on PM 2.5 fine particle soot pollution. The standard had lowered the allowed annual average from 12 to 9 micrograms per cubic meter. The tighter rule was designed to reflect current science on the deadly health harms of soot. The Biden EPA estimated that the tougher standards would prevent about 4,500 premature deaths and hundreds of thousands of people who lost work days and asthma instances over time. Trump's EPA's justification is procedural and economic. They say the tighter standard is too burdensome for permitting an industry and that revisiting it will help states and businesses. So you see, it's not about people. It's about his friends in business. But soot pollution is not theoretical. PM 2.5 penetrates deep into the lungs and the bloodstream, worsening asthma, triggering heart attacks and strokes, and shortening lives. Every credible heart and health authorities recognize this. Rolling back the standards doesn't mean fewer regulations on paper. It means more disease in the body. And where will this harm land? Planet Detroit notes that industrial cities like Detroit, already burdened with high asthma rates and heavy pollution, are especially vulnerable to Trump's era rollbacks. So let's say it plainly. This policy means more kids struggle to breathe. More elderly people will be ending up in emergency room visits. More workers missing jobs because their lungs or their hearts can't keep up. and more people dying early, deaths that the policy could have prevented. Again, this is not an accident. It's a political and economic choice. Sacrifice public health to lower corporate compliance costs and reward his donors. So this is the third hinge point. And here's the through line. Material hardship is paired with environmental harm, and both serve the same power structure. We all know where the power structure is. Now we move to the newest and perhaps the most frightening development in this podcast. A group of 6 Democratic lawmakers, all veterans, all national security professionals, released a video message reminding service members that they have a legal and constitutional right and obligation to refuse unlawful orders. Their statement aligns with long-standing military law and the Uniform Code of Military Justice, which requires troops to obey lawful orders and reject illegal ones. Trump's response was unhinged and dangerous. He called their constitutional reminder seditious behavior and said sedition is punishable by death. This wasn't a fringe commentator making this. This is a sitting president of the United States using the language toward elected officials who told soldiers to follow the law. And the intimidation did not stop at the rhetoric. The FBI scheduled interviews with the lawmakers, opening a preliminary inquiry. Our defense secretary, of course, ordered a military investigation into Senator Mark Kelly, including threats of recalling him to active duty for a potential court-martial. Reuters reports that military law experts see steep hurdles to making any charges stick, and many say Kelly's statements were legally sound and protected by due process and constitutional safeguards. But legality isn't the only story here. The point of intimidation is not always to win in court. The point is to chill speech, to warn everyone watching. If you oppose me, I can aim the machine of the state at you. If reminding soldiers to follow the Constitution is now sedition, then what Trump is really saying is the Constitution itself is what he wants to break. This is an autocratic person speaking as president, signaling plain and simple the Constitution itself is what he wants to break. And explain something deeper about why Thanksgiving feels different. People aren't only afraid because their lives are harder. They're afraid because the president is telling them that speaking about what happens might make them a target. In Maricopa County message in Arizona, they are furious for many good reasons. They say Republicans mostly refuse to hold Trump accountable for this sedition rhetoric. Reuter and PBS note that while a few Republicans express mild concern, most either deflected or dismissed Trump's comments, framing them as political theater rather than threat. If he does anything that's out of bounds, then they always say it's political theater, never holding him responsible for what he said. This is what authoritarians look like in real time. It's not a unanimous cheer supporting it. but a slow surrender through silence and demanding silence. Trump tests the boundaries constantly. The party watches. They do nothing. Sadly enough, the boundaries then move to give him more power. And every moved boundary becomes the new normal. Republicans will not turn on Trump until it hurts their reelection chances. That's the grim calculus Stevens names in her Michigan message, and so does Maricopa County name in Arizona. That's why elections matter, not because voting is magical, but because it is one of the last tools we have left to stop normalization of cruelty and fear that's going on. So let's connect the dots. Because here's what's going on. Policy cruelty plus intimidation equals control. Food aid cuts create hunger and stress. Shutdown policies destabilize families and services. FDA pressure to speed approvals weakens scientific guardrails. EPA Soot rollbacks increase preventable disease and deaths. Sedition threats redefine constitutional duty as treason. Investigations into lawmakers shows that intimidation is becoming operational, not just rhetoric. All these points are operating together. The pattern is not random. It is coherent form of governance. Create chaos or amplify hardship. Strip away protections under the language of efficiency and freedom. Reward donors and industry in the process. Punish or threaten those who name what is happening and normalize the entire arc as patriotism, which it is not. This is a way of extracting safety, stability, dignity, and breath from ordinary lives to feed power at the top. That's why the gold-plated ballroom image in Stevens' letter is more than a jab. It's symbolic. Lavish narcissism in the center of power while the country outside struggles to survive. And let's look. Thanksgiving is always a time. I don't know about you, but at our table, it's a lot of time where we tell stories. And holiday stories are really very important. And every policy we've discussed becomes somebody's holiday story. The aunt who quietly lost her food assistance and doesn't want to say that happened to her, but she's really glad to be at a Thanksgiving dinner. The cousin who couldn't afford a plane ticket after the shutdown interrupted their paycheck. The parents whose child needs inhalers due to soot pollution worsens their asthma. The grandfather whose heart condition is compounded by air that should have been cleaner. The friend fighting cancer who needs to trust the FDA because their life is literally in that pipeline. And the veteran sits at a table who hears a president call constitutional reminders sedition, punishable by death, and thinks, what are we doing? What are we becoming? This is a part where I want to say something very simple. If your holiday joy requires ignoring someone else's pain, that joy is not joy. It is denial. But if your holiday gratitude includes the courage to tell the truth, then gratitude becomes fuel for protection, solidarity, and change. There's a reason Haley Stevens ends with grit. It's not a slogan, it's a survival position, and it's a position we all need to take. Gratitude is not blind cheer. Gratitude is clarity about what matters most, and gratitude is the refusal to let this world harden our hearts into apathy. So here's what I feel grateful for this Thanksgiving. I feel very grateful for my spouse and my son and my friends who make life worth fighting for. I feel grateful for people across Michigan, Arizona, and every state, including my own Texas, who refuse to be intimidated and be silenced. I feel grateful for scientists, doctors, nurses, teachers, union workers, and public servants who keep showing up even though the government makes their work harder. And I feel grateful for voters who understand that democracy is not a mood. It is a practice that requires turning out, organizing, and protecting each other. And most of all, I feel grateful for the chance to fight back. Not because fighting is fun, but because surrender is death by inches. Trump's world wants us isolated, exhausted, and scared. He wants us to think we're alone in our frustration. He wants us to accept hunger as inevitable, dirty air as the price of doing business, unsafe drugs as innovation, and intimidation as strength. We are not required to accept any of these things. Thanksgiving should be a time of connection, peace, and reflection. If you find all three of these this week, I'm truly grateful that you do. But if you don't, if you're worried about bills, anxious about your kids' future, or frightened by what our government is becoming, please hear this clearly. You're not alone. Your fear is not irrational. Your anger is not unpatriotic. And your hope is not naive. It is being human. So we hold on to each other. We tell the truth. We refuse intimidation. And we vote, not as a ritual, but as resistance. Happy Thanksgiving with grit. And I greatly appreciate you listening to my podcast.